The bus rolled to a stop in front of the training gates at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, its brakes squealing in protest. For most of the recruits inside, the sound was nerve-wracking enough to raise goosebumps. For Emily Carson, sitting quietly, with her duffel at her feet, it felt like the sound of a starting gun. 19 years old, fresh from her small hometown in Ohio, she was about to begin a chapter that would change her forever. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass window and stared at the sprawling expanse outside. The sun was already punishing, its heat radiating across the wide asphalt where a group of drill sergeants stood waiting like hawks. Their uniforms were crisp, boots polished to a mirror shine. Even at a distance, Emily could feel their authority. She sat up straighter, forcing herself to breathe evenly. "End of the line, ladies and gentlemen," the bus driver muttered. The recruits began to shift nervously, some laughing too loudly, others fidgeting with their belongings. Emily wrapped her fingers tighter around the strap of her bag. She could almost hear her father's voice again. "Tough times build tougher people, Emmy. Don't flinch." The doors hissed open. The first bark of a drill sergeant's voice cut through the humid air like a whip. "Move, move, move. Off my bus. You are no longer civilians. You are property of the United States Army." Recruits scrambled out, tripping over each other in their rush to obey. Emily rose carefully, hoisting the heavy duffel onto her shoulder. The strap bit into her skin, but she welcomed the sting. It meant she was really here, really beginning. Outside, the chaos intensified. Drill sergeants circled like predators, shouting orders, correcting posture, demanding louder responses. Emily kept her eyes forward, resisting the urge to shrink into herself. She reminded herself of the promise she'd made when she signed the enlistment papers. She would not let anyone see weakness. A tall recruit beside her smirked, elbowing the guy next to him. "Look at her. Bet she cries before chow." Emily caught the words, heat rising in her cheeks, but she didn't react. She had learned long ago that silence was often stronger than words. Still, their voices pricked at her determination. She tightened her grip on her bag and kept moving. The recruits were herded into formation on the wide training field. Dust kicked up beneath their boots, sticking to their sweat. The drill sergeant pacing in front of them was a towering man with a voice like thunder. His campaign hat cast a shadow over piercing eyes that scanned the line. "Listen up," he barked. "I don't care where you came from, what you think, you know, or what your mama told you before you left home. Here, you are all the same nothing until you earn that uniform. You will run, sweat, and bleed together. Some of you will quit. Some of you will fail. That is not my concern. My concern is turning survivors into soldiers." Emily felt the words hit her chest like blows. She locked her knees, refusing to fidget. The sergeant's gaze swept over the formation, lingering on faces. When his eyes landed on Emily, they narrowed for a fraction of a second. He said nothing, only moved on, but Emily felt a surge of electricity in her spine. She wondered if he, too, was judging her small frame, her delicate features. After roll call, the recruits were marched to their barracks. Emily's legs ached from the pace, but she kept in step, determined not to falter. The barracks smelled of bleach and fresh paint, the sharp tongue of disinfectant mingling with the heat. Rows of bunks lined the walls, every corner sharp and square. Emily was assigned a bunk near the window. She set down her bag and glanced around. Some recruits immediately began boasting about their high school sports, their hunting experience, their natural talent. Others fell silent, lost in their nerves. Emily unpacked methodically, folding clothes into neat squares, lining boots just so. The tall recruit from earlier, the one who had mocked her on the field, tossed his bag carelessly onto the bunk across from hers. He smirked again. Hope you don't mind noise. I don't plan on whispering bedtime stories. His friend laughed. Loudly, Emily kept her expression neutral. Noise doesn't bother me. The boy seemed disappointed by her calmness, as if he'd hoped to rattle her. He shrugged and turned away, already whispering to his friend about who looked weakest in the group. Emily exhaled quietly. That evening, Chow Hall was a blur of noise. Trays clattering and orders shouted. Emily ate quickly, grateful for the plain food. She thought of her mother's cooking back home, the warm kitchen, the scent of casseroles, and felt a pang of homesickness. But she shoved it aside. Sentiment wouldn't help her here. After lights out, the barracks settled into uneasy silence, broken by the occasional cough or restless shifting. Emily lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Every muscle ached, every nerve buzzed, but beneath the exhaustion was a fire. She remembered the moment she'd signed her enlistment papers, the recruiter's approving nod, her parents' mixed emotions. Her mother had hugged her tightly, whispering, "Be careful, Emily." Her father had simply placed a hand on her shoulder. "Make us proud." Here, in the dim barracks of Fort Jackson, Emily made another promise to herself. Not only would she survive this training, she would rise above it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of shouted commands, early mornings, and endless drills. Emily's small frame drew constant scrutiny. She ran until her lungs burned, marched until her calves screamed, and lifted until her arms trembled. Still, she never quit. Each time doubt whispered, she silenced it with grit. Other recruits noticed. Some grudgingly respected her. Others doubled down on their skepticism. "She's too quiet," one muttered during a break. "She won't last." But Emily didn't need to announce her toughness. She would prove it when it mattered. The first true test came when the drill. Sergeant gathered them on the firing range. Rows of rifles gleamed under the sun. Targets stretched out in the distance, small silhouettes waiting. "This," the sergeant thundered, "is where we separate the dreamers from the soldiers." Emily's pulse quickened. This was her chance, not only to prove herself, but to silence every doubt that had followed her since she stepped off the bus. She thought again of her father's words, of the endless afternoons spent learning patience and focus behind an old rifle in Ohio. She had trained for this moment without even realizing it. As the recruits lined up, whispers rippled again. Some doubted she could even handle the recoil. Others assumed she'd miss every shot. Emily ignored them. She inhaled, squared her shoulders, and waited for her weapon to be handed to her. She didn't yet know the challenge she was about to face, that the rifle in her hands would not work as it should, that it would jam, falter, and test her in ways no other recruit would endure. But even on that first night, lying in her bunk, with doubts pressing in, Emily already carried within her the resilience she would need. The Army was about to see it. And when they did, it would leave them stunned. The air at Fort Jackson carried a mix of humidity, dust, and tension. By the second week of training, the recruits had grown familiar with the constant rhythm of shouted orders, blisters forming on their heels, and the relentless weight of expectation pressing down on their shoulders. Sleep was scarce, rest fleeting, and nerves frayed. But every recruit knew that soon, the tests would become more than running and push-ups. For Emily Carson, those early days were a blur of sweat and grit. Each morning began with the piercing blast of a whistle at 4:30 a.m., followed by sprints that left her lungs aching. Marching drills dominated the afternoons, voices echoing across the training field as boots pounded in unison. By nightfall, exhaustion clung to every muscle. Yet despite her aching body, Emily never lagged behind. She matched every step, every command, with stubborn resolve. Still, whispers followed her. "She's too small. No way she keeps up. Bet she's gone before month's end. She'll crack when the real tests come." The words bounced around the barracks, often loud enough for her to hear. Emily remained outwardly composed, though inside, each remark dug at her. But she had long ago learned to carry doubt like a weight in her pack, never discarding it, but using it to make herself stronger. It was on a sweltering Wednesday morning that the announcement came. The recruits stood at rigid attention on the field, sweat rolling down their temples beneath the brutal sun. Drill Sergeant Haskins, a barrel-chested man with a voice like rolling thunder, paced before them with hands clasped behind his back. His boots struck the pavement like a metronome, each step deliberate. "Listen up, maggots," he bellowed, his tone carrying over the rows of recruits. "You've spent 2 weeks running like your hair's on fire and sweating like pigs. Some of you are still standing. That's good. But talk is cheap. Muscles don't make soldiers. Stamina don't make soldiers. Discipline makes soldiers. Skill makes soldiers." He stopped abruptly, turning sharply to face them. His eyes scanned the formation, hard and unflinching. "Tomorrow, you'll prove whether you've got what it takes. Rifle marksmanship trial. 0 to qualify." Murmur rippled through the ranks before Haskins' roar silenced it. "Quiet. You'll line up on the firing range at dawn. Targets don't lie. A soldier who can't hit what he shoots at is as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Some of you will pass. Some will fail. The ones who fail will repeat. Again and again, until you either get it right or wash out. Consider tomorrow your first real battle." Emily's chest tightened. She knew this moment was coming. She had grown up around firearms, her father teaching her how to handle a rifle safely, how to breathe steadily before squeezing the trigger. Still, this was no backyard lesson. This was the Army. And here, failure wasn't just embarrassing. It meant jeopardizing her place. Around her, the recruits whispered, some with cocky confidence, others with nervous doubt. "I've been hunting deer since I was 12. This'll be a cakewalk," one boy boasted. Another muttered, "Man, I've never even held a gun before." Emily kept her face neutral, though inside, her heart beat faster. Then, the tall recruit from her barracks, Patterson. She'd learned his name was leaned toward his friend and snickered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Carson? She won't hit 5 targets, mark my words." His friend chuckled. "Bet she cries before it's over." Emily's jaw tightened. She said nothing, but a flicker of determination flared behind her eyes. Patterson could laugh now. She would let her actions speak when the time came. That evening, after chow, the recruits gathered in the common area for a briefing on the trial. Sergeant Haskins stood at the front, arms folded. "You'll each fire 40 rounds. Targets at different distances, 50 meters, 100, up to 300. The minimum to qualify is 23 hits. Fail that, you repeat the trial. Until you pass. But let me make something clear, passing ain't enough. You want to be soldiers? You aim higher. Excellence is the standard here." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then his tone shifted, quieter but sharper. "There's a record on this base. Longest standing, highest score ever. Recorded. Belongs to Sergeant First Class Alan Brooks. 38 out of 40. That was 10 years ago. Nobody's beaten it since." A wave of awe moved through the recruits. 38 out of 40. Almost perfect. Haskins' lips curled into a thin smile. "Tomorrow, I don't expect miracles. But I'll tell you this, every record falls eventually. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day." His eyes scanned them again, as if daring them. To believe they could be that soldier. Emily's pulse quickened. She wasn't thinking about records, not yet. She just wanted to prove she belonged here, to silence the whispers of doubt. But still, the idea planted itself quietly in the back of her mind. That night in the barracks, The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Some recruits lay awake, whispering strategies. Others boasted loudly, trying to mask their nerves. Patterson was among the loudest. "Watch tomorrow," he said to his bunkmate. "I'll score higher than half these clowns without breaking a sweat," his bunkmate laughed. "As long as you don't score lower than Carson." The barracks erupted in chuckles. Patterson grinned smugly. "That's not a risk. She'd be lucky to qualify." Emily, lying quietly in her bunk, stared at the ceiling. The laughter stung, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she thought of the long summer evenings back home, her father correcting her stance, showing her how to steady her breathing. "The rifle doesn't care who you are, Emmy. It only cares how steady your hands are. Focus, breathe, and trust yourself." She repeated those words silently until sleep finally claimed her. Morning arrived brutally early. The whistle shrieked, and the recruits scrambled to their feet. The air was cool, but a haze of humidity promised a scorching day ahead. After a hurried breakfast, they were marched to the firing range. The field stretched wide, dotted with targets that seemed impossibly small in the distance. Rows of rifles lay waiting on tables, each weapon inspected and ready. The recruits lined up, nerves palpable. Emily's heart raced as she approached. The line, the moment she had been dreading and preparing for, was finally here. Patterson, a few spots down, smirked at her. "Don't miss too bad, Carson. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself." Emily ignored him. She fixed her gaze on the targets, her jaw set. The sergeant's voice boomed. "On my command, you will. Pick up your weapon, load, and prepare to fire. Keep your eyes on your lane. Don't worry about the soldier next to you. This is your fight. Targets don't care about excuses." Emily reached for the rifle laid out before her. She ran her fingers along the cold steel, steadying her nerves. But the moment she pulled back the charging handle, her stomach sank. The motion stuck stiffer than it should have been. She tried again. Jam. Her heart pounded. Of all the weapons on the range, she had been handed one that malfunctioned. The sergeant's whistle blew. "Ready positions," Emily's mind raced. She could raise her hand, request a replacement, and no one would think twice. But in that split second, her father's words returned. "It's not the tool. It's the hands behind it." Her grip tightened on the rifle. No, she wouldn't switch. She would make this one work, no matter how flawed it was. As the command rang out, "Fire!" Emily inhaled deeply, steadied her aim, and prepared to face not just the target's downrange, but every doubt, every whisper, every challenge that had trailed her since stepping off the bus. The trial had begun, and Emily Carson was ready. The sun hung low but merciless over the Fort Jackson firing range, casting long shadows across the recruits lined up in neat rows. The air smelled of oil, dust, and anticipation. Every recruit's pulse thudded with the same realization. Today was their reckoning. No excuses, no second chances. Either they proved themselves with a rifle, or they risked being recycled back through training. Emily Carson adjusted her stance at her firing lane. The rifle in her hands felt both familiar and alien. She had handled firearms before back home in Ohio, under the steady guidance of her father, but never in a setting charged with such pressure. Here, mistakes would be counted, tallied, judged. And here, unlike those peaceful summer evenings in her backyard, an audience of skeptical peers and stone-faced drill sergeants waited for her to stumble. She pulled back the charging handle to chamber her first round. Click. Jam. Her heart skipped. The bolt hadn't cycled correctly. She tried again, fingers steady despite the spike of adrenaline. Click. Jam. Panic brushed against her resolve. A malfunctioning rifle. Of all the recruits, why her? Around her, Rifles snapped to life with satisfying metallic clacks as others chambered rounds without issue. Patterson, 2 lanes down, laughed just loud enough for her to hear. "Figures," he muttered. Emily could feel eyes sliding her way. She forced herself not to look up. Drill Sergeant Haskins' boots crunched against the gravel as he moved down the line. His voice boomed like cannon fire. "What's the problem, Carson?" Emily swallowed. "Rifles jamming, Sergeant." Haskins extended a hand. "Swap." Take another." It would have been the easy choice. No one would have blamed her. Malfunctions happened. Recruits switched weapons all the time. But Emily's grip tightened. She shook her head. "I'll use this one, Sergeant." A muscle in Haskins' jaw twitched. He studied her for a moment longer than necessary, eyes narrowing as if weighing her worth. Then he gave a single sharp nod. "Your call, Private. Don't waste my time." "Yes, Sergeant." The whistle blew. "Ready positions." Emily pressed her cheek to the rifle stock. Her breathing slowed. The target, a stark black silhouette at 50 meters, blurred and refocused. All around her, rifles barked to life, the range filling with sharp cracks. Her finger squeezed the trigger. Bang. Jam. The bolt locked halfway. Emily's hands moved on instinct. Tap, rack, reload. She cleared it and fired again. Bang. Jam. Frustration threatened to rise, but she shoved it down. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "The tool doesn't define the craftsman. Stay calm. Fix it. Focus." Each malfunction stole precious seconds, but Emily refused to rush. Clear. Reload. Fire. Clear again. Fire. Every motion became part of a rhythm. Her shots landed true, though her pace lagged behind others. She could almost hear Patterson smirking between volleys. By her 10th shot, sweat slicked her palms, but something remarkable had happened. The panic was gone. She had accepted the rifle's flaws as part of the challenge. Every jam was expected, every fix automatic. Instead of a weakness, the weapon became a test of her patience and grit. A recruit 2 lanes over cursed loudly after missing 3 targets in a row. Another fumbled a reload, costing himself time. But Emily's breathing stayed measured, her movements efficient. Each target she struck lit up her scoreboard with quiet, steady success. The whispers that had mocked her at the bus stop and in the barracks began to fade, replaced by a low current of curiosity. Recruits stole glances between their own shots, watching the girl who should have been failing but wasn't. By the 20th round, Emily's arms burned from the repeated clearing motions. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Yet when she checked her scoreboard, nearly every shot had landed within the black. Drill Sergeant Haskins stopped pacing and lingered behind her for a moment. His silence was telling. He didn't interfere, didn't bark correction, just watched. Then he moved on, leaving behind the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. Emily exhaled slowly. She wasn't here to impress him, or Patterson, or anyone else. She was here to prove to herself that she could endure whatever challenge the Army threw at her, even a broken rifle. The next stage began. Targets flipped up at 100 meters. Her weapon jammed again. Clear, reload, fire. Each shot required more effort. Each success bought with grit. Time ticked down. Around her, rifles roared in smoother cadence, but accuracy faltered under pressure. Some recruits rushed, shots scattering. Emily didn't rush. She accepted the delay, embraced it. Every time the rifle failed her, she answered with calm persistence. The once dismissive whispers in the ranks gave way to uneasy silence. Patterson's smirk had vanished, replaced by a furrowed brow. Even he, with his flawless weapon, wasn't hitting as many bullseyes. By the 30th round, Emily's arms trembled. Her uniform clung with sweat. but her shots spoke louder than exhaustion. The scoreboard glowed. 30 out of 30, nearly flawless accuracy. The only thing slowing her was the rifle itself. A murmur rose from the recruits behind the line. No way. She's beating us. With that, Emily didn't hear them. All she heard was the steady rhythm of her breath and the mechanical clack of the weapon in her hands. The final stage loomed, targets at 300 meters. The silhouettes seemed impossibly far. Time was running short. Emily knew she would have to clear jams faster than ever to finish. The whistle shrieked. She steadied her aim. Bang, jam. Clear. Bang, jam, clear. Each shot demanded precision and speed, and each one hit. The scoreboard climbed, inching closer to the base record 38 out of 40. Emily didn't let herself think about the record. She focused only on the target before her. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Her shoulders screamed. Her hands burned. Still, she pressed on. The second-to-last shot cracked, hitting dead center. 37. The rifle jammed again. She forced it clear, reloaded, and fired. 38. Gasps rippled through the watching recruits. She had tied the record. One shot remained. Only a few seconds left on the clock. Her rifle jammed one final time, more stubborn than ever. Panic surged, but Emily crushed it. Her hands flew tap, rack, reload. She lifted the rifle, breath steady, eyes locked. Bang! The target lit up, dead center. The scoreboard flashed. 39 out of 40, new record. The range fell into stunned silence. Even the drill sergeants exchanged looks. Emily lowered her rifle slowly, her chest heaving. Around her, the recruits who had doubted, mocked, and dismissed her stood speechless. She had done it, not just qualified, not just passed, but surpassed every expectation. With a broken rifle, she had beaten the base record. And in that moment, Emily Carson knew her life at Fort Jackson had changed forever. The firing range had gone silent, except for the relentless cracks of rifles echoing through the humid South Carolina air. Dust lingered like smoke in the heat, and the sharp tongue of gunpowder stung the recruits' noses. Dozens of young soldiers were locked in their own battles against time, nerves, and distance. But it was Emily Carson, slight and quiet, who drew the most eyes. By the 10th shot, her rhythm looked strange to outsiders, unnatural, halting. Fire, jam, clear, reload. Fire. The weapon refused to behave, yet she moved with a calm efficiency that defied the chaos. Recruits who had once smirked at her size now glanced sideways, their own targets forgotten for a moment. Even Patterson, always quick with a sneer, had stopped mid-snicker. Emily tuned them out. She had learned long ago that distractions, whether whispers in the barracks or malfunctions in her hands, only had power if she gave them attention. She refused. Her world narrowed to 3 things: her breathing, her rifle, and the silhouette waiting downrange. Her breathing was steady now. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Each inhale aligned her body. Each exhale steadied her. Hands. The rifle was a beast that bucked against her every move, jamming almost mechanically after each shot. She didn't fight its nature anymore. She worked with it. Clear, tap, rack, reload. The motions became part of her shooting cycle, seamless and fluid, as though she had trained for years with this exact effective weapon. And the targets, they were no longer abstract black shapes. They were challenges lined up one by one, daring her to miss. But Emily didn't miss. Each silhouette popped with a flash of red when her round struck center mass. The first few bullseyes had been met with skepticism. Beginner's luck, one recruit whispered. By her 10th, their muttering stopped. By her 15th, the silence was heavy. At the 20th, Sergeant Haskins halted his pacing behind the line. He folded his arms, eyes narrowing. He was not a man easily impressed. He had trained hundreds of recruits, most breaking under pressure long before this point. Yet here was Carson, her rifle, jamming like a curse, and she was outperforming them all. She felt his presence behind her, but she didn't falter. She didn't need his approval. She only needed to finish. The second stage began, targets at 100 meters. The silhouettes seemed smaller now, harder to see through the shimmer of heat waves rising off the ground. Sweat trickled down Emily's temples, stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink it away. She inhaled, steadied, squeezed, bang, jam. Her fingers worked instinctively. Clear, reload, fire, bullseye. The scoreboard beside her lane ticked upward, glowing with accuracy far beyond the average. Patterson cursed under his breath in the next lane, his own shots scattering just outside the bullseye ring. His rifle cycled smoothly, but his nerves betrayed him. His hands shook with every reload. Every miss was another blow to his pride, especially with Carson outperforming him. In plain sight, "Damn it," he muttered after his third miss. Emily didn't react. Her focus never wavered. By the time she reached 30 rounds, her arms ached from the repeated clearing motion. Her shoulder throbbed from recoil. But the ache felt distant, background noise compared to the intensity of her focus. 30 out of 30, one recruit whispered, staring at her scoreboard in disbelief. "She hasn't missed a single one?" The whisper spread like wildfire. The once skeptical crowd behind the firing line now leaned forward, drawn in despite themselves. They weren't just watching a recruit anymore. They were witnessing something none of them expected. Quiet dominance born of calm resilience. The third stage raised the stakes again. Targets flipped at 200 meters, far enough to make the black silhouettes blur against the backdrop. The clock ticked down mercilessly. Emily raised her rifle. Bang, jam, clear, fire. The scoreboard lit. Again, she didn't smile, didn't exhale in triumph. She just reset, prepared for the next. Her body screamed with fatigue now. Each jam stole seconds she didn't have. She knew she'd have to work faster, smoother. But she refused to let urgency steal her accuracy. "Carson's insane," another recruit muttered, his own shots scattering wide. "She's beating the record pace with a busted rifle." The phrase hung in the humid air, beating the record. Even the commander, who had been inside the small office near the range, stepped outside. His brow furrowed as he saw the scoreboard glowing higher than anyone else's. He folded his arms, quietly observing. By her 35th shot, Emily's uniform clung with sweat. Her hands were raw from cycling the weapon. Her chest rose and fell like a bellows. But her scoreboard read 35 hits, 35 bullseyes. Every recruit had stopped whispering now. Silence gripped the range, broken only by the crack of rifles. Patterson missed again, growling under his breath. His face burned red. It wasn't just frustration at himself. It was humiliation. The girl he had mocked endlessly was outshooting him by miles. And worse, she was doing it with a defective rifle. He stole a glance at her, expecting strain, maybe panic. Instead, he saw nothing but calm concentration. The sight twisted the knife deeper. The final stage loomed, 300 meters. The hardest test. Even skilled shooters struggled here. Emily wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve, steadied her rifle, and waited. The whistle blew. Targets snapped upright. Bang, jam, clear, fire. Her first shot hit. The scoreboard flashed. Bang, jam, clear, fire. Hit again. Her cycle continued, mechanical but graceful. Each jam slowed her, but each bullseye erased the delay's sting. The scoreboard climbed. 36, 37. The recruits leaned. In, eyes wide. "She's gonna break it," one whispered. Patterson's jaw clenched. He fired wildly, missing another. His score barely scraped passing, but nobody cared. All eyes were on Carson now. 38. She had tied the record. Her rifle jammed again, stubborn, unyielding. She slammed the side, cleared it, reloaded. The clock ticked down, seconds bleeding away. She sighted in, breath held. Bang! Dead center? 39. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The record was broken. She had one shot left. The clock showed. Only a few seconds. Her rifle jammed worse than before, refusing to clear. Sweat dripped into her eyes. For a heartbeat, panic threatened to break her composure. No, she crushed it down. Her hands flew tap, rack, reload. The round chambered. She raised the rifle, steadied, fired. Bang! The target lit up. 40 out of 40. The scoreboard glowed. Like a beacon, the base record wasn't just broken. It was shattered. The recruits erupted in stunned murmurs. Patterson stood frozen, his face pale. Even Sergeant Haskins, who rarely showed emotion, let out a low whistle. The commander crossed his arms tighter, his stern expression hiding what might have been. The faintest smile. Emily lowered her rifle slowly. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, her arms trembling. But her expression was calm, almost serene. She hadn't come to make history. She had only wanted to prove she belonged. Now, no one doubted. The silence that followed wasn't mockery. It was respect, awed, begrudging, but undeniable respect. Emily had turned pressure into performance. With every jam, she had shown composure that most recruits couldn't match even with flawless weapons. She had proven toughness wasn't about size, volume, or bravado. It was about discipline under fire. And that day, on the firing range of Fort Jackson, Emily Carson had shown them all. The firing range still smelled of scorched powder and hot brass, but the echoes had faded. Silence lingered in the wake of Emily Carson's record. Recruits who once smirked or whispered behind her back now stood rigid, their expressions unreadable. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stared openly, still trying to process what they had witnessed. Emily lowered her rifle, her arms trembling from fatigue. Her uniform clung to her skin, soaked through with sweat. She let out a long breath, steady but quiet, and stepped back from the firing line. She hadn't sought applause, and none came. But the silence was heavier, more meaningful. It was the kind of silence that acknowledged truth, uncomfortable, undeniable truth. Patterson removed his ear protection, tossing it down with a sharp flick of his wrist. His face was still red, but his eyes carried something darker, humiliation. He had mocked her relentlessly, made her the punchline of his jokes since day one. Now she had surpassed him in front of everyone. When Emily passed by him on her way back to the benches, their eyes met briefly. He expected her to smirk, too, savor her victory. But she didn't. She only nodded once, calm and respectful, as if acknowledging a peer. That stung worse than any gloating ever could. "Nice shooting," Patterson muttered under his breath, though his tone made the words feel like ash. Emily didn't reply. She didn't need to. Sergeant Haskins strode down the line, boots grinding into the dirt. His face remained unreadable, but his eyes lingered on Emily longer than on the others. When he stopped in front of her, the entire line held its breath. "You had a malfunctioning rifle the whole time," he said flatly. "Yes, Sergeant," Emily replied, her voice steady. "And you still hit 40 out of 40. "Yes, Sergeant." Haskins studied her a moment longer. His silence felt like a test, as if he were probing for arrogance or pride. But Emily kept her posture straight, her gaze fixed forward. Finally, he gave a single curt nod. "Good work, Carson." The words were simple, but coming from Haskins, they carried weight. The silence behind her deepened. Back in the barracks that evening, the atmosphere had shifted. Normally, the bunks buzzed with chatter complaints about training, jokes, trash talk. But tonight, conversation faltered when Emily entered. A few recruits glanced up, then quickly looked away. Others whispered softly, their voices low, as though afraid to speak too loudly in her presence. She didn't hear the usual barbs, the mocking remarks about her size or strength. Instead, there was just silence. Emily sat on her bunk, untying her boots with tired hands. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply focused on her task, moving with the same quiet determination that had carried her all day. Across the room, Patterson sat rigid on his bunk, staring at the floor. He hadn't spoken since returning from the range. His usual circle of friends gave him uneasy glances, but stayed quiet. Even they couldn't defend him now. Later that night, as lights out approached, Emily heard a voice from the bunk above hers. "Hey," it whispered. Emily looked up. It was Reyes, one of the taller recruits who had joined Patterson in mocking her early on. His face was hidden in the shadows, but his tone lacked its usual sharpness. "You really did all 40?" he asked quietly. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." There was a pause. Then Reyes muttered, "Respect." It was only one word, barely audible, but it marked a turning point. Over the next few days, the ripple of her performance spread across the company. At Chow, recruits who once cut in front of her in line now stepped aside without comment. During drills, the smirks vanished. Even the whispers changed, not jeers anymore, but hushed conversations about the girl who had broken the range record with a faulty weapon. Not everyone was happy about it. Patterson's pride had taken the hardest hit. He tried to reassert himself, barking orders at others when drill sergeants weren't around, but fewer recruits listened now. His words lacked weight. Emily didn't exploit the shift. She didn't demand recognition or hold her victory over anyone's head. She kept her head down, trained harder, and carried herself with quiet dignity. And that, more than anything, made her impossible to ignore. One afternoon, during physical training, the platoon faced a grueling run. The August sun beat down mercilessly as they pounded across the asphalt trail. Patterson tried to surge ahead, setting the pace, but he faltered halfway through, dropping back with a scowl. Emily, small but steady, kept moving at a relentless rhythm. Her strides weren't fast, but they were consistent. By the time the run ended, she crossed the line near the front, her breathing controlled. Recruits who had once doubted her now fell in step behind her. They didn't say it aloud, but the message was clear. She wasn't just surviving basic training. She was leading, even if quietly. The moment that sealed the shift came during weapons cleaning that evening. Patterson sat hunched over his rifle, muttering curses as he struggled with a jammed bolt. Frustration poured off him in waves. Emily noticed from her bunk. Without a word, she stood, walked over, and crouched beside him. "Here," she said. Softly, she reached out, adjusted his grip, and showed him the clearing method she had mastered under fire. The bolt slid free. Patterson froze, staring at the weapon, then at her. For a long moment, pride and shame warred on his face. Finally, he muttered, "Thanks." Emily only nodded and returned to her bunk. The barracks stayed silent, but it was a different silence now. Not one of mockery, one of acknowledgement. Sergeant Haskins noticed the change too. During drill the next morning, his sharp eyes scanned the line of recruits. When his gaze landed on Emily, he gave the faintest nod. The silence that had once been a cage around her had transformed. It wasn't the silence of dismissal anymore. It was the silence of respect. She had turned doubt into something stronger, something lasting. And though she never sought recognition, Emily Carson had become the quiet center of her platoon. The Georgia sun felt like it was trying to burn through the earth itself. The training field shimmered with heat waves, the air thick and unforgiving. Dust clung to every breath, mixing with the salt of sweat until recruits could taste the grit on their tongues. It was the kind of day designed to test the limits of human endurance. Emily Carson stood in formation, her uniform plastered to her body. She tried to steady her breathing, but the anticipation was already gnawing at her chest. She knew what was coming. Today's training would push every one of them past exhaustion. "Welcome to the breaking point," Sergeant Haskins barked, his voice booming over the sweltering field. "Today, you find out what you're really made of. Some of you will collapse. Some of you will fail. And a few of you," his eyes swept over the line before resting briefly on Emily, "might just surprise me." The recruits stiffened. Some exchanged nervous glances. No one dared speak. The challenge began with ruck marching. Each recruit shouldered a heavy packed 50 pounds of gear, strapped tight against already sore muscles. The straps dug into Emily's shoulders like claws, and the weight pressed against her spine with every step. The trail stretched for miles, winding through uneven terrain, shaded only occasionally by sparse trees. The sound of boots striking dirt became a steady drum beat. Patterson trudged near the front, determined to reclaim his pride after his humiliation. On the range, he moved with aggression, but Emily noticed the strain in his shoulders, the stiffness in his gait. She kept a steady pace, her breathing controlled. Step after step, mile after mile, she focused not on the pain in her shoulders, or the heat beating against her skull, but on the rhythm of her strides. 1 foot forward, then the next. The sun climbed higher, merciless. Sweat poured down every face. Packs dug deeper. Recruits began staggering, some falling out of formation entirely. Haskins was relentless, barking at those who faltered, his voice sharp as steel. "Carson," he snapped at one point. "Still keeping up?" "Yes, Sergeant," she gasped, though her legs felt like they carried lead. Haskins gave a curt nod before moving on. He didn't praise. He didn't need. T.O. The acknowledgement was enough. Hours later, the ruck ended. Packs were dropped with groans of relief, but the reprieve lasted seconds. "Drop," Haskins barked. The recruits hit the ground. Push-ups began, then burpees, then low crawls through. Dust so thick it coated their teeth. Their arms shook, their chests burned, and still the drill sergeants demanded more. Emily pushed herself through each motion. Her muscles screamed, her lungs begged for mercy. Sweat stung her eyes until her vision blurred. She wanted to stop, to collapse into the dirt and let it swallow her whole. But she didn't. When she faltered, she remembered the rifle range, the silence afterward, the respect she'd earned, not by words, but by action. She couldn't lose that now. Still, doubt crept in. With every crawl, every push, every sprint, her body whispered, "This is too much. You can't do this." But another voice rose inside her, quieter, but steadier. One more rep, one more crawl, one more breath. And she listened. By mid-afternoon, recruits began dropping out. One by one, they collapsed in the dust, medics rushing in with water and stretchers. Patterson stumbled, his face red, his breaths ragged, but he pushed stubbornly onward. His pride wouldn't allow him to quit. Emily felt her own body failing. Her arms trembled violently during push-ups. Her chest heaved with every breath. At one point, her vision darkened around the edges, the ground spinning beneath her. She hit the dirt face first. For a moment, she didn't move. The weight of woe. Exhaustion pressed her into the earth. She could hear footsteps pounding past, voices shouting, but they felt distant, muffled. This is it, she thought. This is the breaking point. Then she felt a hand shove her shoulder. Carson, up! It was Sergeant Haskins, looming over her. His shadow cut across the sun. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried no sympathy, only command. Up, or you're done. Emily's body screamed no. Her arms refused. Her legs shook. But something in his tone, harsh, yet challenging, ignited a spark inside her. With a groan, she pushed against the dirt. Her body trembled violently, but slowly, inch by inch, she rose back onto her feet. Her vision cleared. Her chest burned like fire, but she was standing. Haskins gave a single nod, then moved on. Emily kept going. The final challenge was the log carry. Recruits grouped together, hoisting massive wooden beams onto their shoulders. Each log weighed hundreds of pounds, requiring coordination, strength, and sheer grit. Emily was assigned to Patterson's group. The irony wasn't lost on either. Of them, they locked eyes briefly, then took their places. Lift, a drill sergeant barked. A log rose shakily into the air, balanced across 6 recruits. The weight was crushing, driving into Emily's shoulder with unrelenting force. Patterson grunted, his jaw clenched tight. Step after step, they staggered forward. Dirt shifted beneath their boots, and the log wobbled dangerously. Some recruits shouted, straining to keep it steady. Emily grit her teeth and focused. She matched her breathing to the rhythm of their steps, digging into the last reserves of her strength. Every muscle in her body screamed, but she refused to falter. When one recruit stumbled and nearly dropped his end, Emily shifted instinctively. Taking on more weight, Patterson noticed. For a split second, their eyes met not with rivalry, but with unspoken understanding. Together, they steadied the log and carried it forward. By the time they reached the finish line, every recruit under that beam was drenched in sweat, shaking with exhaustion, but they had made it. And Emily was still on her feet. That night, back in the barracks, the exhaustion was bone deep. Recruits lay sprawled on bunks, too drained to speak. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of shared survival. Patterson sat on his bunk, across from Emily. For once, he didn't glare or mutter under his breath. He simply watched her for a long moment before finally saying, "You didn't quit." Emily looked up, her eyes weary but steady. "Neither did you." For the first time, Patterson gave a small, almost reluctant smile. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it wasn't hostility either. The wall between them had cracked. Sergeant Haskins stood outside the barracks that night, speaking quietly with another drill sergeant. His expression remained unreadable, but his words carried weight. "That one Carson, she's got something different," he said. The other sergeant raised an eyebrow. "Think she's leadership material?" Haskins's gaze lingered on the barracks, where recruits finally drifted into exhausted sleep. "She's got more grit than half this platoon combined. If she doesn't break, she'll lead." Inside, Emily lay awake on her bunk, her body aching from head to toe. She thought about the breaking point, how close she'd come, how much she'd wanted to give in, but she hadn't. And in that silence, she realized something. It wasn't just about proving others wrong anymore. It was about proving herself right. She could do this. She would do this. The morning fog hovered over Fort Jackson like a thin veil, softening the jagged edges of the training field, but doing nothing to lessen the intensity of the day. Recruits lined up in formation, shoulders squared, faces blank but eyes sharp, anticipating what challenges awaited. Emily Carson stood near the middle of the formation, her body still aching from yesterday's grueling log carry and ruck march, but her mind alert, her posture calm. She had survived the breaking point, and now something new tugged at her. Responsibility. Leadership. It wasn't a word spoken aloud, It wasn't a badge or a rank. It was something you felt, the subtle authority that emerged when others saw. You're not just enduring, but guiding, influencing, and inspiring. Emily could sense it stirring within her. The day began with obstacle courses. Wooden walls, low crawls, rope climbs, and muddy pits stretched across the field like a gauntlet. Recruits charged forward in groups, competing against both the clock and each other. Emily had completed many of these before, but today she noticed something she hadn't before: the hesitation in some of the newer recruits. They lingered at walls, slipped in mud, or froze at rope climbs. Emily slowed her pace and approached a small group struggling with a wall. She didn't shout or lecture. Instead, she demonstrated the motion foot placement, arm leverage, proper timing. Then she stepped back, letting them try. When one recruit faltered, she offered a hand without hesitation. "Trust your momentum. Don't fight it," she said, her voice calm but firm. The recruit hesitated, then tried again. This time, the wall yielded. The others followed, gaining confidence from her guidance. Across the field, Sergeant Haskins noticed her. His sharp eyes narrowed as he watched Emily quietly lead by example rather than words. Meanwhile, Patterson noticed too. His pride bristled as he saw recruits flocking to Emily for advice. He had once dismissed her, mocked her, and now she commanded. Quiet respect without saying a single boastful word. He clenched his fists, but there was something unfamiliar in the knot of tension in his chest. Admiration, begrudgingly earned. Emily's leadership was subtle, but unmistakable. She didn't seek attention. She simply did the work, demonstrated skill, and helped others succeed. Slowly, the platoon began looking to her for guidance, especially in moments of hesitation or doubt. By midday, the obstacle course had stretched their endurance to the limit. Sweat dripped from Emily's brow, mingling with the streaks of dirt that coated her uniform. Yet she maintained composure. Every instruction she gave, every correction she offered, carried clarity and patience. Recruits began following her cues. Instinctively, no words needed. Haskins observed from a distance, a shadow of acknowledgement crossing his stern features. The next challenge was a tactical simulation, designed to test teamwork and decision-making under pressure. Recruits were divided into squads, assigned mock missions with time constraints and obstacles meant to simulate real combat conditions. Emily was placed in a squad with Patterson and several others. Immediately, tension simmered. Patterson's pride had not yet fully reconciled with her emerging authority. "Lead if you think you can," he muttered, tone laced with both defiance and curiosity. Emily met his gaze evenly. "We succeed together, or we fail together. Let's move." It was simple, but her words carried authority. She mapped out the course in her mind, weighing each obstacle, each risk. "You two take the left flank. Cover each other. I'll handle the center and coordinate." The squad moved under her direction, and the difference was immediate. Tasks were executed with efficiency. Mistakes were corrected quickly. Confidence grew, even among the recruits who had doubted themselves earlier. Patterson followed her instructions with precision, occasionally glancing at her for reassurance. He wasn't used to taking direction from anyone, let alone someone he had mocked weeks earlier. But Emily's competence left no room for argument. By the end of the simulation, the squad had completed the course faster than any other group that day. The drill sergeants observed with approval, jotting notes and exchanging brief glances. Emily's leadership had transformed what might have been chaos into coordination and success. The platoon gathered afterward, and whispers spread like wildfire. Recruits who had once ridiculed her now respected her. Their tone changed from skepticism to admiration. "Did you see how she handled that rope climb?" One recruit whispered. "She didn't even raise her voice. She kept us moving, another added. I didn't think I'd make it, but she made it work. Even Patterson, usually vocal, with criticism, remained silent. His jaw clenched, but his eyes followed Emily as she moved through the ranks. The real test came in the afternoon. Marksmanship drills with dynamic movement. Recruits had to move through obstacles while maintaining accuracy, adjusting to targets that appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Emily approached her station with the same meticulous focus she had shown weeks ago on the range. Her rifle jammed mid-session, the familiar metallic click that would have caused panic in others. Emily smiled faintly to herself. She had mastered the rhythm, the patience, the recovery. Clear, tap, rack, fire, bullseye. But today wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about showing others how to maintain composure under pressure. She glanced sideways at a recruit struggling with a malfunctioning rifle. Calmly, she demonstrated the clearing technique once more, then returned to her own target sequence. By the end of the exercise, she had not only achieved perfect marks, but had helped her peers improve drastically. The drill sergeants took note. Emily Carson was no longer just a high-performing recruit. She was becoming a leader in action. That evening, after drills concluded, the platoon assembled for day briefing. Haskins stood before them, his expression grave but not unkind. Today, I observed something I don't say often, he began. Some of you were effective because you followed instructions. Some of you were effective because you learned from mistakes. And one of you, Carson, led others to success without being asked. The platoon shifted, surprised by the rare recognition. Emily's heart thumped quietly, a mix of pride and humility. She didn't stand taller. She simply listened. Haskins continued, leadership isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about presence, influence, and competence. Carson showed all three today. Take note. A murmur of acknowledgement spread across the recruits. Emily glanced at Patterson. His expression was unreadable, but there was a subtle nod. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The acknowledgement was enough. Over the next week, the shift in the platoon became more pronounced. Recruits sought Emily's advice during training, consulted her during drills, and unconsciously followed her lead in chaotic scenarios. She didn't wield authority like a weapon. She earned it quietly through consistency and competence. Even Patterson, initially reluctant, began to collaborate. He still retained pride and edge, but he learned to respect Emily's judgment, even when it contradicted his own instincts. The dynamic between them evolved from rivalry to a tense, productive partnership. Emily's influence reached beyond just her squad. The energy she radiated helped stabilize morale, especially among recruits struggling with the intensity of basic training. Her calm confidence became a model. Others who had doubted themselves found courage to push further. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling endurance drill, the platoon faced a series of timed tasks, sprints, rope climbs, and a final log carry. Some recruits were near collapse, stumbling under the strain. Emily ran forward to coordinate, calling out positions, offering guidance, and demonstrating techniques. Her presence alone changed the tempo. Panic transformed into organized effort. By the time the drill concluded, the platoon had finished ahead of schedule. Fatigue hung over them like a thick blanket, but pride and camaraderie now filled the air. Haskins observed silently, jotting notes. He rarely praised, but his attention alone conveyed recognition. Emily had shifted the balance of the platoon not by command, but by example. That night, in the barracks, recruits whispered about her quietly. Stories of her range record, her endurance through breaking point drills, and now her emerging leadership spread like wildfire. Respect was no longer silent, it was universal. Patterson, lying across from Emily, spoke softly, almost to himself. I underestimated you. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her work, her actions, and her quiet strength spoke louder than words ever could. For the first time, she realized that leadership wasn't a role assigned by rank. It was a responsibility earned every day through action, patience, and resilience. And Emily Carson was ready to carry it forward, no matter the obstacles ahead. The sun rose slowly over Fort Jackson, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Birds chirped faintly, but the usual clamor of recruits was subdued. Today was different. Today marked the culmination of weeks of sweat, grit, and relentless training. Today, Emily Carson and her platoon would face the final comprehensive evaluation, a test combining physical endurance, tactical skill, marksmanship, and teamwork. Emily woke before the reveille, her body still sore, but her mind alert. She sat on the edge of her bunk, tying her boots, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Weeks ago, she had been the smallest, quietest recruit in the platoon, mocked and underestimated. Now, she was no longer just surviving, she was setting the standard. Her rifle hung at her side, polished and ready. Her uniform was neat sweat, and dirt replaced with the disciplined shine of a soldier prepared to prove herself one last time. At the assembly field, Sergeant Haskins' sharp eyes swept over the platoon. He rarely spoke at length, but his tone carried authority. Today, he said, you will demonstrate everything you've learned. Coordination, endurance, marksmanship, and resilience. Some of you will succeed, some will fail. But one thing is certain: leaders will emerge. Observe, follow, and excel. Emily's chest rose steadily, a quiet calm settling over her. She had already proven herself in every category individually. Today was about integrating it all, showing that she could carry not only herself, but inspire her platoon to succeed. The evaluation began with a grueling obstacle course that spanned the entire training field. Recruits climbed walls, swung over mud pits, crawled through tunnels, and scaled ropes coated in slippery sweat and dirt. Emily moved methodically, demonstrating efficiency without haste. She noticed new recruits struggling to find their rhythm. A few froze at the edge of a wall, unsure how to scale it. Without hesitation, Emily adjusted her pace to match theirs, offering guidance. Use your legs, not just your arms. Trust the momentum, she instructed quietly. They followed her example, moving with a precision they hadn't had moments before. Emily led by showing, not by shouting, and the effectiveness was unmistakable. Patterson ran alongside her, his expression tense but controlled. He had learned to respect her judgment, and in moments of doubt, he deferred to her instinct. Next came the tactical simulation. Teams were given a scenario requiring coordinated movements, obstacle navigation, and strategic decisions under pressure. Emily's squad was tasked with capturing a high-value target while navigating a simulated minefield and avoiding enemy observation. She paused for a moment, mapping the path in her mind. Then she issued calm, precise instructions. You two flank left. Cover each other. I'll move center and coordinate. Watch for traps, take it slow, steady, deliberate. The squad executed flawlessly. When a recruit stumbled into the mud, Emily was there instantly, offering support, without judgment. By the time they reached the target, the squad had completed the scenario faster than any others that day. Haskins observed from the sidelines, jotting notes. He rarely gave praise verbally, but his raised brow and narrowed eyes were a silent endorsement. Emily had proven her leadership once again. After the tactical test, marksmanship was next, but with a twist. Targets appeared unpredictably, some moving laterally, others partially obscured. Emily's rifle jammed mid-sequence, a familiar metallic click sounding in the quiet field. Her hands moved automatically, clearing, tapping, and racking the weapon before squeezing the trigger again. Bullseye. Another target appeared. She repeated the rhythm, flawless under pressure. Nearby, a recruit struggled with the same malfunction. Emily moved quickly, demonstrating the clearing procedure without disrupting her own rhythm. Her patience and competence elevated the performance of everyone around her. By the end, she had achieved perfect marks while improving the accuracy of her peers. Patterson watched quietly. His pride wrestled with admiration. He had learned to follow, and yet he hadn't fully let go of the competitive edge. But today, even he couldn't deny her dominance. The final test was endurance, an integrated challenge combining long-distance runs, weighted carries, and simulated combat tasks. The platoon faced exhaustion from hours of non-stop activity. Recruits collapsed, stumbled, and some even quit. Emily felt the familiar burn in her muscles and lungs, the creeping doubt that had haunted her in previous breaking points. But she drew on the lessons learned weeks ago, one step at a time, one breath at a time. Focus, not fury. Rhythm, not panic. As she ran, she noticed Patterson faltering. Without a word, she slowed to match his pace, subtly guiding him through each obstacle. He resisted for a moment, pride flaring, but he eventually nodded and followed. Together, they moved as a team. Emily's squad watched, inspired. Even those who had once doubted her now followed her cues instinctively. Her leadership had become a stabilizing force. By the time the endurance challenge ended, the entire platoon had been pushed to their limits, and yet, under Emily's guidance, they had finished in record time. Sergeant Haskins approached afterward. He rarely praised, but his tone was deliberate. "Carson," he said, "today you demonstrated everything we expect from a leader. Composure under pressure, skill in execution, and the ability to elevate those around you. You didn't just survive, you led. And that is what separates recruits from soldiers." Emily nodded quietly. No words were necessary. She had earned the recognition, not through boastful statements, but through consistent action. Patterson stepped forward. "You earned it," he muttered, tone still tight but sincere. Emily offered only a nod. Their rivalry had shifted into a professional respect, one forged through shared struggle and demonstrated competence. That evening, in the barracks, the atmosphere was electric with subdued celebration. Recruits whispered about Emily's achievements, retelling stories of the rifle record, the breaking point endurance, and her emergence as a leader. For Emily, pride was tempered with humility. She knew the journey was far from over. Leadership was a daily responsibility, not a single accomplishment. Yet she allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement. She had come further than she ever imagined. Patterson, sitting across from her on his bunk, spoke quietly. "I misjudged you," he admitted. Emily glanced up, her eyes meeting his. "We all have room to grow," she replied simply. It was enough. Weeks later, the platoon graduated from basic training. The ceremony was formal, filled with speeches, applause, and the proud faces of families. Emily Carson received recognition from the commanding officers for her performance and leadership. She didn't seek the spotlight, but she stood tall, calm, and composed, the embodiment of the soldier she had worked so hard to become. Her rifle record remained unbroken. Her reputation as a leader among her peers was solidified. Those who had doubted her now spoke with respect, and those who had struggled beside her had learned the value of persistence and calm determination. Sergeant Haskins, usually silent in such ceremonies, gave a subtle nod from the reviewing stand. It was acknowledgement enough, silent, precise, and meaningful. Even Patterson, standing beside her for the final inspection, nodded quietly. The past rivalry had transformed into mutual respect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily looked over the training grounds one last time. The rifle range, The obstacle course, the muddy trails, all had tested her in ways she hadn't imagined. She had faced doubt, adversity, and near exhaustion, yet she had emerged stronger, calmer, and more confident. Her legacy wasn't in trophies or records alone. It was in the respect of her peers, the acknowledgement of her drill sergeants, and the quiet proof that discipline, determination, and composure could overcome almost any obstacle. Emily Carson had arrived as the underestimated recruit. She left as a symbol of resilience, leadership, and silent strength, a standard that others would measure themselves against for years to come. And in that moment, she understood the truth that had carried her through every challenge. Real strength wasn't loud or boastful. It was calm, steady, and unwavering, shining brightest when the world expected her to falter. The legacy was hers. She had earned it.